A manhunt intensifying right now for a gunman allegedly dressed as Santa Claus who opened fire inside a packed Turkish nightclub. That attacker killing a police officer standing just outside, then turning a New Year's Eve party in Istanbul into a killing field. At least 39 people are dead, nearly 70 others wounded, with the terrorists still this hour on the loose. Hello, everyone. Welcome to America's News Headquarters. I'm Greg Jarrett. As a night of celebration turns into carnage, authorities are starting the first day of 2017 with an investigation on who may be responsible for this deadly attack. John Huddy following the latest developments live in our Middle East Bureau. John?
Yeah, well, Greg, Turkey's prime minister says that investigators do have one key piece of evidence, that being a gun. As you mentioned, the manhunt for this attacker continues, and the hope is that they get him before he carries out something else. We don't know what type of gun. Authorities said he was carrying a long-barreled weapon of some kind. We heard maybe an AK-47, but again, we're waiting for more details on that. That said, the massacre happened at about 1:15 this morning at the Reyna nightclub in the Ortaköy neighborhood of Istanbul. Very popular area at the foot of the Bosphorus Bridge. A lot of bars, a lot of restaurants, a lot of shopping. So it was very packed there, and more than 600 people were inside the nightclub celebrating the new year when officials say that the attacker shot and killed a policeman and a civilian out front and then stormed inside the club and then sprayed the place with gunfire. And in the panic, some people reportedly jumped into the freezing Bosphorus River as others hid behind couches and under tables. As mentioned, 39 people were killed, almost 70 wounded, some critically, so that number could certainly go up. Turkey's prime minister denied reports that the attacker was wearing a Santa Claus outfit, though surveillance video does show him wearing a Santa hat inside the club. He was initially seen dressed in all black and carrying a black backpack outside the venue, though it appears, according to officials, that he may have changed once he was inside the club in order to escape. So far, no group has claimed responsibility. We don't have an ID of this guy, but as we've seen, the most vicious attacks in Turkey last year were carried out by either ISIS or Kurdish militants. Today, Greg, Pope Francis condemned the attack in his New Year's message. World leaders, also outpouring of condolences, were pouring into Turkey from other world leaders, including Russian President Vladimir Putin, who said that Russia stands alongside Turkey in the fight against terrorism. The White House called this a horrific terrorist attack, the first terrorist attack of 2017, Greg.
John Huddy live in our Middle East Bureau. John, thank you. New fallout from Russia's alleged interference in our presidential election. A plane at Dulles Airport, just outside Washington, D.C., has finally left, taking those 35 expelled diplomats back to Russia. In the meantime, lawmakers from both parties are speaking out about the cyber attacks as well as the U.S. response. Caroline Shively is live in Washington with more. Caroline?
Hi there, Greg. The Russian diplomats are somewhere over the Atlantic right now on their way home. They headed out along with about 60 dependents on this Russian plane at Dulles. The deadline for them to leave was 10 minutes ago, but they beat it by a couple hours. Their expulsion is the most visible part of the punishment doled out after U.S. officials accused Russia of meddling in the election with email hacks and now putting malware on the laptop of an electric company in Vermont. But they also locked up two of their luxury compounds Friday at noon in New York and Maryland when the U.S. blocked access to them. The Obama administration says they were used for intelligence gathering. A number of the booted Russians also came from the Russian consulate in San Francisco. Some Republicans say these sanctions weren't enough.
Vladimir Putin is KGB. He always has been. He always will be. President Obama has consistently looked the other way from Russia's provocations and aggressions. The DNC hack last year was just one minor item in what Russia has done over the last 8 years.
Congressman Adam Schiff says Republicans are trying to put the blame on Democrats for not putting up better defenses to the Russian hacks. But today he said the focus needs to be on the Kremlin.
They were careless, but that doesn't let Russia off the hook. Yes, it got them in the door, but Russia and Putin and the Kremlin, they're the ones that made the decision to dump and weaponize that information.
Senator John McCain has set a hearing over the Russian hacking and cybersecurity for this Thursday. Greg?
Caroline Shively in Washington. Caroline, thanks. In the meantime, the president-elect says he's still not sure that Russia had anything to do with hacking our election. Mr. Trump also expressing doubt over the security of online communications in general during his annual New Year's Eve bash last night. Peter Doocy is following that story live from Palm Beach, where the president is spending the weekend. Peter.
And Greg, the president-elect made some big news on his way into that big ballroom for the New Year's Eve party here at Mar-a-Lago by saying that he thinks the reason that he's skeptical of Russian involvement with U.S. election interference is that the U.S. intel community is pushing the line, and he thinks that they were wrong about weapons of mass destruction, so they could be wrong about this as well. He also says he knows something we don't know that has informed his opinion about this subject, but that ultimately computers just aren't that safe.
It's very important, but if you have something really important, write it out and have it delivered by courier the old-fashioned way. Because I'll tell you what, no computer is safe. I don't care what they say, no computer is safe. I have a boy who's 10 years old. He can do anything with a computer. If you want something to really go without detection, write it out and have it sent by courier.
And this morning, the president-elect's chosen press secretary, Sean Spicer, explained why the transition team is puzzled about the heavy-handed punishment Putin just got from the Obama White House because they think the current president has let others get away with much worse.
In 2015, China took over 1 million records, sensitive data of people like me who had worked in the government at any time, classified our personal information, where we lived, things that we had written down on our applications or on our security clearances, and not a White House statement wasn't even issued. No action publicly was taken. Nothing. Nothing was taken when millions of people had their private information, including information on security clearances, that was shared. Not one thing happened. So there is a question about whether there's a political retribution here, whether it's versus a diplomatic response.
So the president-elect has just a few more hours here at Mar-a-Lago, then it's off to New York, where he will receive that intelligence briefing about alleged Russian interference with the U.S. electoral process in the next couple of days. And that's not all that he's got on the schedule. We were told at the end of last week to expect a flurry of activity as Mr. Trump races to complete his cabinet before Inauguration Day. Greg?
Peter Doocy live in Palm Beach. Peter, thanks. North Korea ringing in the new year with an ominous development in his annual New Year's speech. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un suggesting that the regime is in the final stages of testing an intercontinental ballistic missile, an ICBM, marking a potential breakthrough in Pyongyang's weapons program. Elizabeth Pran is following the story for us out of Washington. Elizabeth?
Hi, Greg. Well, in his annual New Year's address, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has now hinted to both North Korea and the world that his country is close to testing an intercontinental ballistic missile and that these tests have, quote, reached the final stage.
Research and development of cutting-edge weapons has become active, and the intercontinental rocket missile test fire preparation got to the final stages.
Now, Kim did not explicitly say whether these tests were imminent, but he has a birth date on January 8th. Last year, Pyongyang conducted a nuclear test on January 6th. In 2016, the communist nation reportedly carried out nuclear tests while conducting up to 20 ballistic missile tests in that time period alone, setting an annual record. South Korea's unification ministry said in a statement that it, quote, strongly condemns Kim's threat to proceed with a test launch. It goes on to say the international community will not tolerate his efforts to develop nuclear weapons and threatens tougher sanctions and additional international pressures. South Korean diplomat and former UN Secretary Ban Ki-moon expressed deep concerns as well.
I'm deeply concerned about that news that North Korea is continuing to provoke the international community by testing ballistic missiles. The United Nations has already taken 5 sanction measures. It is important that all international community members should fully cooperate so that these sanction measures will be fully implemented.
North Korea has been under UN sanctions since 2006 over its nuclear tests, and sanctions were increased at the end of 2016 after its very large test back in September. Greg, back to you.
Elizabeth Pran in Washington. Elizabeth, thanks. Let's get reaction to all of this from Ambassador John Bolton, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, a Fox News contributor, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Ambassador, Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year.
All right, so North Korea close to testing an ICBM. The trick for them, of course, is miniaturizing a nuclear warhead that would fit atop of it. And if they do, they're a clear threat to the United States, are they not? And what can and should we do about it?
Well, I don't believe it because Kim Jong-un says it. I don't really believe much of what he says. I do believe it because of what the commander of U.S. Forces Korea and the South Korean military have been saying for close to a year now, that they are close, the North Koreans are close to being able to miniaturize a nuclear device, put it on top of one of these Taepodong missiles, and they expect shortly, maybe early 2018, that package would be able to hit targets on the west coast of the United States. And obviously, beyond that, once you can put a ballistic missile into Earth orbit, you can bring it down pretty much anywhere if you have the guidance. And that means Iran, with which North Korea has been testing ballistic missile technology for well over 20 years, and in my view anyway, quite likely cooperating on the nuclear side as well, maybe a lot closer to a nuclear capability than people think, not to mention, as I say, any other rogue state with some loose change that wants to buy it.
Well, I mean, it's a pretty dire scenario that you're laying out here, and we know that imposed sanctions have never worked. They've never deterred North Korea from their nuclear ambitions. It doesn't deter their provocative threats toward the United States. What should the U.S. do, therefore?
Well, I think we've had the failure in the last two administrations. You know, the Undersecretary of State Condi Rice, North Korea was taken off the U.S. list of state-sponsored terrorists. That was a big mistake. Sanctions on North Korea were reduced in aid of a failed negotiation effort. That was a mistake. The Obama administration came in and had 8 years of what it somewhat amusingly called strategic patience with North Korea. The North Koreans said fine. They just spent 8 years continuing to develop nuclear warheads, testing 4 times, and advancing their ballistic missile program. We're in very deep trouble because of North Korea's progress and the potential of cooperation with Iran. So I think we need to do a couple things. Number one, the Trump administration should follow through on what the candidate said and restore America's national defense, missile defense program well beyond what it was even in the Bush administration. We've got to be able to protect our civilians. And number two, I think the notion of negotiating with North Korea on this was wrong 25 years ago. It hadn't gotten any better with age, and they always will. And even General James Clapper, the current director of national intelligence, has said that. I think there's only one answer here, and it's a hard road, but it is the only answer. Go to China and say, look, we've got to eliminate North Korea by merging the two Koreas into one state and eliminating that nuclear capability.
What would we suggest that China therefore do?
Well, China has unique capability to bring the regime in North Korea down. They supply 90% of North Korea's petroleum supplies. They provide enormous humanitarian aid to North Korea. China's worried, obviously, as is South Korea, about a potential catastrophic collapse in North Korea. I think we should work with China and South Korea to prevent that from happening. But look, this division of the peninsula is unnatural, and as long as North Korea survives, that nuclear and ballistic missile capability are only going to grow.
So a coup, essentially. I mean, create the conditions so that there would be a coup to overthrow Kim Jong-un, a new regime put in place that would be more friendly and less provocative toward the U.S.
Or just the collapse of the regime entirely. I think this regime is much more fragile than people think, but it needs somebody to give it a push. I think the only acceptable outcome long term, as I say, is the merger of the two Koreas. The two Germanys are now one. The two Koreas will be one someday as well. The only question is whether we do it sensibly or it happens catastrophically.
I'd like to get your reaction to the events last night at the Istanbul nightclub. 39 people murdered by what appears to be a terrorist attack. 70 people wounded. Does this underscore the murder ISIS and other terror groups pose, and what's your take on it?
Well, we still don't know whether it was ISIS or PKK or some other terrorist group. Wouldn't be surprised if it was ISIS. They've been attacking civilian targets in Turkey, I think, as they're pressed militarily on the ground in Syria and Iraq. And it underlines why incoming President Trump really should follow through on another of his campaign commitments, which is destroy ISIS as soon as possible. As long as ISIS has a sanctuary, as long as it can continue to recruit and train terrorists and deploy them, whether it's in Turkey or continental Europe or in the United States, they remain a threat. And the slow roll approach of the Obama administration these past 2 years, I think, has just allowed ISIS to continue terrorist activity in the West, and the sooner its safe haven is eliminated totally, the better.
You know, Turkey is a NATO ally, a NATO member, and an ally of the United States in the war against ISIS. President Erdogan survived a bloody coup in July. Since then, has consolidated his power. Will he use this event to do more?
I think there's little doubt that Erdogan's pursuit of authoritarian power for himself and his party is going to be provided with a pretext by this attack. Look, Erdogan has taken Turkey far away from its place in the Western orbit. He's abandoned 100 years of Turkish effort to be a secular Western state. Vladimir Putin is preying on this, trying to slice Turkey off from the NATO alliance. So I'm very worried about the direction of Turkey, not because I think Erdogan really has a majority base among the citizenry for being as extreme as he is, but because it's very hard and getting harder to oppose him in Turkey now. The military has been purged of its secular elements, the judiciary. It's a very, very ominous situation in Turkey.
Not good. Ambassador John Bolton, many thanks. Good to see you. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year.
Crews continue to scour the Lake Erie area looking for a missing plane, and now they're getting more help with their search. And Russian diplomats today leaving Washington after President Obama orders them out of the United States. How will this affect relations between the two countries as a new administration prepares to take office? Here's a quick check of the headlines. Pope Francis touting peace in his New Year's Day remarks at the Vatican. The pontiff telling the crowd of 50,000 gatherers in St. Peter's Square that 2017 will be a good year for those who reject hatred and do good. Illness interrupting a long-held tradition for the Queen of England. The rest of the royal family attending a church service today on the royal estate. The service has long been a part of Queen Elizabeth's New Year's Day tradition. She also missed the Christmas church service last week for the first time in decades.
I just want them to be sure, because it's a pretty serious charge, and I want them to be sure. And if you look at the weapons of mass destruction, that was a disaster, and they were wrong. And so I want them to be sure. I think it's unfair if they don't know. And I know a lot about hacking, and hacking is a very hard thing to prove. So it could be somebody else. And I also know things that other people don't know, and so they cannot be sure of the situation.
Like what do you know that other people don't know?
You'll find out on Tuesday or Wednesday.
President-elect Donald Trump agreeing to meet with intelligence officials to hear more about claims of Russian hacking of our election system. Mr. Trump taking a wait-and-see approach as the White House slaps Moscow with new sanctions, expelling 35 diplomats. So what's next for U.S.-Russian relations? Lieutenant Colonel Michael Waltz is a former Green Beret commander, former counterterrorism advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney, author of the book titled Warrior Diplomat. He's a Fox News contributor. Colonel, always good to see you. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, and Happy New Year.
So, you know, you heard Donald Trump say no computer is safe. Why then would he not believe that Russians hacked our computers?
Well, you know, I'm happy to see President-elect Trump taking the issue of our computer system vulnerability seriously. Everything from our critical infrastructure to the thermostats in our home are now online and incredibly vulnerable. And there's kind of a saying in the cyber community that says there's two types of computer systems: those that know they've been hacked and those that don't know they've been hacked. And I'm also thrilled to see him going out and talking to our intelligence professionals this week, most of whom are actually military members and dedicated civil servants, not political appointees, to really get into the details of what happened.
Well, you know, the DNC was warned way back when that your system is awful. I mean, it's got all sorts of ways that your security can be breached. And when 17 U.S. intelligence agencies, as well as the FBI, all conclude the same thing, the Russians hacked it, we've seen the evidence, why the reluctance on the part of the president-elect?
Well, I think, you know, this could be, and this is speculation on my part, but this could be couched in a broader kind of geopolitical deal here. You know, on the one hand, the President-elect Trump and his team have been very clear that we have to get much tougher with ISIS, much tougher with China, taking a hard look at the Iran deal, and they may believe that they need Russia in order to take all of those other very serious foes on. You know, a deal could look like something like, you know, acquiescing or acknowledging the Russian annex of Crimea in exchange for taking a much harder stand on the Iran deal and getting the Russian kind of acquiescence to doing that. So I think there could be some holding back here and looking at that broader strategic picture. And very importantly, there's a distinction to be made in knowing that the Russians tried to hack or did hack our system and proving that it actually influenced the election. And I think that's the distinction the Trump team's trying to make.
All right, so as our reporter Caroline Shively pointed out, the plane is left with the 35 diplomats who were kicked out, and that was the principal punishment that we're aware of by President Obama, who promised, you know, it was going to be tough and proportionate to the crime that was committed by them of the hacking.
Right.
That's hardly that, is it? So you kick out, you know, some diplomats and you free some assets that probably don't really exist. Yeah. Is that an embarrassingly tepid response by President Obama?
Well, frankly, I think President Obama and his administration's foreign policy writ large, including the Russians, has been tepid for 8 years. You know, here we are on the heels of a change in administrations, and after Crimea, after Ukraine, after working with the Assad regime to barrel bomb and essentially conduct genocide, the largest genocide since World War II we've seen in Syria, you know, we're going to kind of have these finger wagging at the very end. So, you know, I think it's way too little and way too late. You know, I'm glad he at least did something in response, but I don't think it's nearly enough.
Lieutenant Colonel Michael Waltz, thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you. And again, Happy New Year.
You too. Speaking of which, a New Year's Day terror attack in Turkey is our top story, stoking fears around the world. The death toll now standing at 39. It could rise, and a manhunt is underway. The latest on the breaking news right after this. Fast-moving developments on our top story. Turkey launching a massive manhunt for a gunman who opened fire on a New Year's celebration. 39 people at least are dead, nearly 70 others wounded after the attack at a jam-packed nightclub. Hundreds of people in Istanbul. Let's talk about this with New York Congressman Lee Zeldin, who's on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, co-chairman of the House Republican Israel Caucus. He also traveled last week with a bipartisan congressional delegation to the Middle East. You visited multiple countries under Central Command operations, right? What is your reaction to the events of last night in Turkey?
Turkey has faced a lot of terrorist attacks just over the course of the last month. It was certainly a rough year, and this isn't a good way for them to start 2017. Still waiting to find out who's going to claim responsibility. It could very well be ISIS. It could be PKK. You have the efforts against ISIS in Syria, but then you also have the Kurds in both northern Syria and northern Iraq. Sure. And Turkey doesn't want the Kurds to have their own country. And the alignment. I mean, Turkey talking with Russia, working with groups, individuals threatening the stability of Turkey, and Erdogan, they really need to figure out how to take better control of their country in a way that doesn't violate human rights. We see a lot going in the wrong direction.
All right. Because you're on the committee involving Israel, I want to ask you about John Kerry's speech 70 minutes long. John McCain called it a pointless tirade. On the other side of the aisle, Eliot Engel of New York, top Democrat on the Foreign Affairs Committee, said it was gratuitous and wrong. There doesn't seem any purpose to this other than to embarrass Israel. Are they right and Kerry wrong?
Oh, no question. I mean, that you're quoting a lot of really important sentiments. I think a lot of the American public feels. The speech could have been 80% shorter to say the same exact thing. As a matter of fact, I mean, it should have been 100% shorter. He paid lip service to the incitement of violence on the part of the Palestinians. Israel is our nation's greatest ally. And we should be standing shoulder to shoulder with them during these difficult times. And Secretary Kerry, the Obama administration, they're playing along with this pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel narrative. That UN Security Council resolution is one to ethnically cleanse East Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria. So for the secretary on his way out the door to be giving this kind of speech, legitimizing a lot of illegal murder, terrorizing of innocent Israelis, it's unfortunate script for a dangerous shift in American foreign policy.
Kerry's speech entirely criticized Israel. Almost no criticism of the Palestinians. He failed to criticize the Palestinians for refusing to recognize Israel. Abbas and his Fatah still vow destruction of Israel. You can go to their website and see it. Kerry failed to cite Palestinian incitement and terror attacks. And look, I was there during the second Intifada as Israel was under fire. And, Abbas continues to refuse to even meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Not a word about that from Secretary Kerry. Was he just absolutely clueless on all fronts?
I wish I could say that. I mean, that would be better if the answer was that he's clueless. The problem is that, there's a growing element within the Democratic Party that is anti-Israel. And by the way, as we saw from Senator Schumer, and you referenced Eliot Engel, it's not the Democratic Party is an element within the Democratic Party that, when the House Foreign Affairs Committee has a hearing, we see half the crowd wearing pink shirts wanting to bring Bibi Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders up on war crimes charges. I met with the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority in 2015 in Ramallah. He said in no uncertain terms, and it's been reiterated since, they will not recognize Israel as a Jewish state. If they had an election right now for the PA, Hamas would win the election.
Sure they would.
And they will not rest unless Israel's wiped off the map. Right. That is a reality. If Israel made all these concessions, it still wouldn't bring peace.
Now, Hamas, of course, controls all of Gaza and is both a political but mostly a terror organization. You mentioned Chuck Schumer. Here's what he said. I fear Secretary Kerry has emboldened extremists on both sides. He may have done that.
Well, that's right, because you're basically legitimizing this narrative, this anti-Israel narrative. With the BDS movement, we see it on college campuses in the United States where college students are being exposed to anti-Semitism. I'm Jewish. I grew up in New York. Went to college, law school, 4 years in active duty of the Army. I never experienced anti-Semitism. And now all across our country on our college campuses, but even more so than that is the economic BDS effort to target the Israeli economy today, foreign companies, foreign countries. So when it relates to what we see here at home or what we're seeing around the globe or efforts at the United Nations, when innocent Israelis get murdered by Palestinian terrorists and John Kirby, as spokesperson for the State Department, accuses both sides of terror. Or when United States taxpayer funds get used to financially reward terrorist families for murdering what was in one case Taylor Force, a United States military academy graduate gets murdered. Our tax dollars go to the Palestinian Authority. They financially reward these terrorist families.
The United States continues to be the largest contributor of financial aid to the Palestinians. That may change sometime soon.
Sure hope so.
All right, Representative Lee Zeldin, good to see you. Welcome back from the Middle East.
Thank you.
Lots of major events happening in 2016, from the war on terror against ISIS in the Middle East to an unprecedented presidential election here at home. Fox's chief news anchor Shepard Smith takes a look back at the stories that made the biggest headlines.
2016 saw instability around the globe and a historic presidential election here at home. Those stories and more dominating the headlines in 2016.
Back up.
The year kicked off with an anti-government demonstration. Armed militants took over a federal wildlife refuge in southeastern Oregon. The standoff finally came to an end in mid-February. President Obama declared a state of emergency over the lead-contaminated water in Flint, Michigan. Nearly a year later, the water is still not safe to drink unfiltered. In North Carolina, the then governor, Pat McCrory, signed the state's controversial law to limit bathroom options for transgender people. In response, major companies announced their plans to take their business elsewhere. The biggest shakeup in recent political history after Donald Trump won enough delegates to clinch the Republican presidential nomination. He later announced Indiana Governor Mike Pence as his running mate. And Hillary Clinton secured the Democratic nomination after an unexpectedly tough challenge from the independent senator from Vermont, Bernie Sanders. She later chose the Virginia Senator Tim Kaine as her vice presidential candidate. The worst mass shooting in modern American history happened in 2016 when a gunman opened fire in a gay nightclub in Orlando, killing 49 people. He died after a shootout with police. Britain shocked the world when it voted to leave the European Union. Financial markets around the globe plunged after the decision. NASA's Juno spacecraft flew into Jupiter's orbit on the 4th of July, giving us our best look yet at the largest planet in the solar system. Back here on Earth, the FBI Director James Comey announced his decision not to file criminal charges against Hillary Clinton. But just days before the election, Director Comey said investigators were reviewing thousands of newly discovered emails that could be related to the case. After reviewing the new emails, Comey said he is still not recommending any charges against Hillary Clinton. The year also saw major attacks targeting law enforcement officers in several cities. The deadliest happened in Dallas. A suspect shot to death 5 officers ambush style during a protest against police violence. Officials in Florida announced the first locally transmitted cases of the Zika virus here in the United States. The feds have since warned pregnant women to avoid parts of the Miami area. Here in the United States, a series of attacks just hours apart. Investigators say a suspect stabbed 10 people at a mall in St. Cloud, Minnesota. An off-duty cop later shot the suspect and killed him. That same weekend, handmade bombs exploded in areas of New York City and New Jersey, injuring nearly 30 people. Police later arrested that suspect after a shootout. Donald Trump pulled off perhaps the biggest political upset in history, winning the election to become the country's 45th president. The billionaire and former reality TV star won the Electoral College, but lost the popular vote to Hillary Clinton. Fidel Castro died at the age of 90. The dictator ruled Cuba for half a century. President-elect Trump has called on the island country to improve its human rights record, threatening to reverse President Obama's work to normalize relations with Cuba. And the year closed out with a tragedy here at home. Dozens of people died after a fire broke out at a warehouse in Oakland, California, where crowds had gathered for a concert. City officials said they had already been investigating that warehouse for code violations. Looking ahead to 2017, President-elect Trump begins his first year in office. The whole country waiting to see how he follows through on his promise to make America great again, and his pledge to drain the swamp of corruption in Washington, D.C. We'll keep a close eye on the fight against ISIS and the civil war in Syria. Of course, we'll be here for all of it. In New York, I'm Shepard Smith, Fox News.
And sadly, 2017 beginning with a fond farewell to an icon of the 1970s television. Actor William Christopher has died at the age of 84. You may recall he played the beloved Father Mulcahy on the popular television series MASH. Christopher's agent says the actor died just after 5 this morning at his home in Pasadena, California. He was diagnosed with cancer more than a year ago. He had been in hospice care since the beginning of the week. President Obama set to meet with fellow Democrats this coming week. Can he salvage any of his signature health care law? Plus, vandals hit the famous Hollywood sign, and yes, you can read that. We'll be right back.